NCEE have launched a series of articles and thought pieces from leaders, academics and influencers on the current crisis. Leadership through COVID-19 is designed to provide insight into current and future responses and how creative and entrepreneurial approaches have been adopted. Today we have with us Dr. Adam Shaw, who is Director of the School of Business and Management at Liverpool John Moores University, a board member of NCEE and co-founder of Dynamic Rock, a climbing centre. Adam's research focuses on entrepreneurial learning and how you learn from your mistakes and failure. In particular, it focuses on significant events and our response to them. And there's nothing more significant than what is happening right now. When looking at failure, you get swamped with quotes from all the greats, Henry Ford, Winston Churchill. For me, my biggest inspiration on failure is Ben Affleck. He was the joke of Hollywood. He was making film flop after film flop. He was dating J-Lo and he was the joke of Hollywood. But years later, he won the best Oscar for directing Argo. And he said in his 2012 Oscar acceptance speech, two things he learned about failure. One was not to hold a grudge. And the second one, it doesn't matter, you just have to get up. So we're in a difficult time now. Businesses are failing and leaders in all organisations are facing significant challenge, with failure being a real threat. And today Adam will discuss how we can cope. So welcome Adam, and thank you so much for contributing and joining us on this series. I'll start with Ben seemed to learn a lot from his failure. Is failure a good thing?
So failure is often celebrated in the culture of entrepreneurship as a positive force for learning. In entrepreneurial communities, it's not unusual to hear statements such as fail often, fail fast, fail forward, with the implication being there that failing promotes learning. Outright business failure, though, in reality can have many negative consequences for the entrepreneur's mental and physical health, family cohesion, financial well-being. Failure has many implications, and significant business failure has been conceptualized to cause a strong emotional response, similar to the grief felt from losing a loved one. Failure can provide plenty of opportunity for learning. There's a number of examples similar to Ben where people say that they've learned from their mistakes. However, when you dig a little bit deeper, you look at those specifics, sometimes it's harder to identify precisely what has been learned and if this has resulted in a change of behaviour. You might take a number of examples in everyday life, for example, where we continue to repeat the same mistakes. How many times have you burnt your tongue on a hot cup of tea or tried to eat pizza too fast? So there are these examples where we see that we don't necessarily learn from our mistakes. What the research does show, though, is that the negative impacts of failure or critical events even can act as a barrier to any learning. And so we must work to support individuals in coping with the negative physiological and psychological effects that such events can elicit.
So how much failure can one person take?
Well, this is quite an interesting one. I think the research certainly shows that accumulated failure impacts and interacts with the level of negative emotional response. And this acts to form a barrier to what we might call personal growth. Many people are probably familiar with the Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grief. And whilst this hasn't necessarily been validated empirically, the research does show that there are 3 dimensions of negative emotions that are associated with the grieving process, and that these can then lead to personal growth. So if I just explore those emotions a little bit, we talk about despair, disorganization, and detachment. So despair being loneliness, feeling like the individual is in shock, a feeling of hopelessness. Disorganization, a difficulty of remembering things, difficulty concentrating, difficulty learning new things or taking on new information. And the detachment is this feeling of being unable to cope, being afraid of losing control, and perhaps feeling detached from others. And so what we see is that individuals tend to operate in different ways to cope with these negative emotions. So some individuals will operate in a loss orientation, meaning that they might focus on what went wrong, how it happened, ruminating over the details. And this can elicit higher levels of negative emotional response. And if that negative emotional response is already high and the entrepreneur experiences another failure, for example, then this will have a further impact on the entrepreneur's ability to grow or learn from that event. The other way people deal with that emotional response is to operate in what's called a restoration orientation. So focusing on new activities, avoiding the negative emotions, taking up golf or new hobbies, or simply moving on quickly from the failure. And whilst this approach tends to help reduce those negative emotional responses relatively quickly, it doesn't necessarily assist with growth or learning, because time hasn't been taken to reflect on what went wrong. And in addition, recollection then of the event can trigger new peaks of emotional distress.
So are there things that we can put in place so we can support recovery from failure?
Yeah, there's so first there's a number of factors perhaps involved here if we talk about recovery from failure. So first we might think about recovery from the physiological or psychological symptoms of grief that can occur as a result of failure. Alternatively, we might think about financial recovery from the failure itself. So, and that might be conceptualized in a number of different ways through the entrepreneur not meeting their financial expectations, some type of underperformance in the firm, or it could go as far as firm bankruptcy, individual bankruptcy, and the knock-on effects from that. And again, in a third measure, we might consider recovery in terms of the learning opportunities that are available and how then we might support individuals or organizations to adapt, to innovate, to develop, or re-enter then into entrepreneurship. So in each of these examples, the support is really there to try to activate reflection. And reflection here is the key activity that is necessary to promote that loss orientation that allows learning, and by then providing support or facilitated sessions to help understand and sense make or make sense of what happened through perhaps action learning sets with those that might be approaching, experiencing, or even recovering from failure. And in doing so here, then we're much more likely to enable a shared reflective practice and support that recovery approach.
Is it worth us putting our effort into those that have failed? I mean, or should we just start again with shiny, fresh new people? Or, are there benefits to us supporting those individuals particularly?
So those individuals that have gone through that failure have developed a level of knowledge, understanding, entrepreneurial capital, if you like, through that startup phase, through business growth, through all of the lessons learned from employing people. And all of that experience is extremely valuable and can certainly offset what is termed the liability of newness from anybody new entering the entrepreneurship process. And the research certainly demonstrates that entrepreneurship as a whole is indeed a process, and failure is part of this process. So if we disregard those that have failed as not being able to cut it, then we're potentially missing out on a wealth of experience and learning opportunities. So if you take a bit of a macroeconomic view of that, the society has invested into the training and development of the entrepreneur, possibly through funded startup programs, for example, and therefore re-entry into entrepreneurship will actually be cheaper, possibly resulting in additional economic benefits through employment, contribution to GDP, etc. And so there very much are benefits there. And we can also learn vicariously from that failure if we go through those shared experiences and that reflective practice concept that I detailed earlier.
So thinking of maybe our students who are, about to enter the labour market or, look for careers, do we prepare them enough for failure and having a positive response to it?
We absolutely should be preparing our students for failure. I mean, think about resilience, creative thinking, coping with ambiguity, dealing with adversity. These are all skills that employers and future leaders will require. And it's certainly our mission at Liverpool Business School to develop these key skills. So by exposing students to situations of uncertainty through experiential learning environments, for example, we provide students there with live experiences from which they can develop their reflection skills. And as I've previously noted, that critical reflection provides us with the opportunity to learn from failure, either small or large, and seek to adapt our actions to improve the future iterations of similar experiences. So by experiencing the ambiguity and uncertainty in a safe environment, students are then better prepared to cope with setbacks in the future.
So looking more broadly, I suppose, how can we use your understanding of our reaction to failure to support our future?
So I've talked about the negative emotional response to critical events, and this is clearly applicable in the current circumstances. If we look at those three dimensions, despair, disorganisation and detachment, then we do read of reports and we're aware of people that are struggling with loneliness, that may have experienced the shock and hopelessness in these early early days or weeks of where we are. Disorganisation, it might be difficult to concentrate, picking up new things and adapting to new technologies. And definitely the detachment dimension of feeling detached from others, perhaps feeling a bit of a loss of control. So understanding here helps us to build and raise our awareness. So our first approach to the support will be building our awareness, and it's likely that these negative emotions that people in our organisations may be dealing with are going to be further impacted with the devastatingly sad stories, loss of life that this terrible disease has inflicted, and so we can support that by providing opportunities to share, to discuss. At Liverpool John Moores, for example, we're utilising our technologies to host virtual coffee mornings, to bring in a little bit more of the familiar attachment that we might be useful, and providing then the space to enable individuals to interact, share their experiences. And so in these times, we really do need to be flexible and understand that there are multiple complexities in our individual lives. But by providing the space to support that social reflection, opening the avenues for discussion, support, and a shared experience will help to support our future.
And are there finally, I suppose, any practical steps that we as universities can take, based in your research, that we can support the economic recovery of our regions, our cities, and the UK?
Yes, so already universities play a vital role in research and development, and as part of the community in their civic missions. At Liverpool John Moores, our vision to be a pioneering modern civic university reflects that ongoing commitment to the transformative power of education through those themes of innovation, aspiration, and inspiration. It means that civic and global engagement that builds and deepens our connections both within the city, but also across the globe, where we have that international impact and are able then to enrich the lives of our students, our city, and those broader communities. As universities, our research has a direct impact and on businesses through research and development, through knowledge exchange, and we work with a large number of organisations and businesses to support the development of schemes, policies, and new ways of thinking that will directly impact the economy. We continue to work with our students and partners to develop new programmes. And I mentioned previously about the sort of the live projects, those types of practical ideas where students can be working with organisations to help support and provide insight into real challenges that are being put forward. Both the businesses and the students gain benefit from those activities. There's also then a pressing need for both leadership and management development. And we will need to work with employers and partner organisations to determine the type of support that best meets their needs. And this type of support will be vital as we look to support that economic recovery.
That's great. Thank you so much, Adam, for your insight on failure. It's got me thinking quite a bit, and it's about our reaction to it and our consideration of it. This is one part of a series of articles. We're releasing a new one every week. Do keep an eye on our website, Twitter and LinkedIn for further articles. But thanks again, Adam. I really appreciate your time in what's a very busy time at the moment. So thank you.
Thanks, Kerry. It's been a pleasure.